Good day everyone and welcome to my first ever reviewing every album by a band series. And today I have for you the metalcore band All That Remains. I first heard this band around 15 years ago, and I'll admit I tried listening to them. I couldn't really get into them too much, except for the occasional catchy chorus. Not a whole lot stood out to me. Part of it is that whole metalcore, mellow death style really isn't my thing. Mainly it's the harsh vocals I'm not into. I don't mind using those sparingly. Think Testament's DNR for an example of a song where I like their use. But recently I have been getting a little more into that style. So about 2 months ago I decided, why not get drunk and listen to every All That Remains album, which is what I did. But I'm still not real familiar with this band, so when I call this a non-fan reviews every album, it's not from a place of not liking the band, and it's not from a place of first time hearing their music. It's just from a place of, I've heard their music, but I don't know it very well, except for Divine and Anti-Fragile, both of which are bangers, by the way. Spoiler for if I'm gonna like their latest album. So how this is gonna work, I'm gonna talk about every studio album. This will be done over the course of several days from my perspective. Thankfully, I'm off work for the time being. I'll listen to an album, I'll take notes, and then I will review that album for this video. I will also be scoring albums with a letter grade system, mostly similar to the grading system in our schools here in the US. So A will be the best, B is really good, C is on the good side of okay, D is on the bad side of okay. Now I added an E just for balance, and that will be a bad album, and then F is the worst. Also, I shouldn't have to say this because adults should already know this, but this video being a review is just my opinion. If you have a different opinion, that's totally fine. If you want to voice that in the comments section, that's fine too, as long as you're respectful. If not, well, if you comment anyways, thanks for the engagement. Also, I am visually impaired, so if I read an album title wrong, song title wrong, or band member name wrong, that's why. Now let's go ahead and get started. Their discography kicks off with their 2002 debut album, Behind Silence and Solitude. I'm gonna be honest, this is easily going to be my least favorite of their albums. I think it has a pretty cool early mellow death type sound to it. The guitar tone isn't bad, but it is a bit rough around the edges, as can be the case with a lot of debut albums. But a lot of the songs sound the same. There are no clean vocals, no real catchy choruses to be found here. Phil's screams are all very one-dimensional. There's not really a lot of variety, no change in emotion. It's just kind of the same repeated sound throughout the album. Honestly, I almost feel like this would be better served as an instrumental. To be honest, it's really boring. He just barks his vocals in this very monotone manner, and there's almost no variety whatsoever. And there's nothing really engaging about the music. It's not awful or anything, it's just everything gets very repetitive, and there's not a whole lot that stands out to me. There are little moments. There's a guitar riff in the song Shading that caught my attention. The intro to One Belief caught my attention. But neither of those moments were enough to get me into either of those songs. The only standout track for me is Erase. This one's actually pretty decent. It has kind of a cool, clean guitar in the intro, and its chorus is actually kind of memorable, even with the monotone vocals. And there's an okay solo in this one. My issue with this song is it's over 6 minutes, and it should not be. This song should have been more around the 4-minute mark, and it would have worked a lot better. But it's still a decent song, and the one track I would come back to from this album. I'm gonna give this album an E ranking. It's not great. I don't think it's necessarily bad, it's just not my cup of tea. But I do have to feel like even amongst albums of this style, there has to be a lot more varied and interesting albums out there. But again, it is just their debut album. And it did still have one song that I do like. Not the worst thing ever, but still pretty bad. Next up is 2004's This Darkened Heart, and this album perfects everything that they were trying to do on the debut. Everything is better here. There are still way too many harsh vocals for my taste. I knew I was going to get into that when I decided to do this video. So for me personally, that's going to prevent me from really getting into this album very much. I'm just not into 90% of vocals on an album being that harsh. But even those harsh vocals are vastly improved here. It's not a monotone barking like we got on the debut album, for the most part. He does put a few different inflections into his vocals, and that makes things a lot more engaging, even for me. And we get some actual clean singing on occasion. The choruses to For Salvation and Focus Shall Not Fall are melodic and indicate a little bit of what this band would be going forward. And conveniently, those happen to be two of the three songs I like on this album. You also have The Deepest Gray, which does still have mostly harsh vocals. It's actually pretty amazing how just adding in a couple lines of clean vocals to a chorus to help emphasize what he's doing with the harsh vocals really helps that one out. I will say that the song Passion doesn't do it for me. I borderline actively dislike the song. It feels like a regression to more of their style on the first album. His growls tend to sound a lot more like he did on that album. There is still more variety on this track, but it definitely felt like a step back. But even beyond the vocals, this album is a dramatic improvement. I will full disclosure here, I only skimmed the debut album except for Erase because I found it really boring. But this album, I listened to straight through, and musically, it's pretty on point. There's a decent amount of variety. They throw in a few decent solos here and there. There's also a few acoustic moments thrown in just for variety. And it makes things a lot more engaging. There are a lot more memorable guitar riffs, things that stuck out to me and made me want to keep listening. And with the debut album, while I admit that style of metal is not really my thing, the best I could see somebody feeling about that album would be It's Okay, which I would actually agree with for the most part, even though I think it's kind of bad. I can easily see why this album is so highly regarded. Musically, it's very engaging, and there are some decent songs, and if you like mostly harsh vocals, yeah, I don't see why anybody wouldn't enjoy this album. I'm going to give this album a D+. I still don't find it something I want to keep coming back to, but I can see why people like this one. Next up, we have The Fall of Ideals, released in 2006, and this has to be top shelf All That Remains. Based on very limited research, it seems like the general consensus is this is the band's best album. And I can definitely notice a step up in quality, particularly with the songwriting, which is vastly improved. And there's even some more interesting musical moments throughout this album. The album incorporates a few more melodic choruses, but they still keep the heaviness. It's not quite the same as the first two albums, as they lean more into metalcore and away from mellow death, but overall I think it works for them. The album starts off with one of my favorite songs by the band, The Calling, and what a fucking opener this is. Great chorus, great drums, great guitar riffs, a nice guitar solo. It's just a banger of a way to start the album. And it's not alone, which is not really a pun that's intended, but that leads into the next song. The Calling is the first of three straight bangers to start the album. The next two being Not Alone and It Dwells in Me. Both of these are great tracks to follow up one of their best songs. We Stand is a bit of a drop in quality, but still not a bad track. But it's followed up with Whispers, I Hear You, which is another banger. My only issue with this first half of the album is after the first two tracks, it does kind of slow a little bit. I'm not as into the second half of this album, but there are still certainly good moments to be found. The Weak Will doesn't really do anything for me, as it seems to harken back a little bit more to their first two albums. 6 has some pretty cool moments. I like how the verses are up tempo and the vocals are mostly screaming, but there's some clean vocals mixed in there. It has a nice dynamic. I've always liked the mix of screams and cleans if done well. I do wish this song had a melodic chorus. I'm not saying they needed to take out what they had, just add a melodic chorus to it, and I think this would have been one of my favorite tracks on here. It's also got a kind of cool little clean guitar part as an interlude. Become the Catalyst and The Air That I Breathe are really good tracks as well. Not as good as the four I mentioned earlier, but they are still very nice. The last two tracks don't really do much for me. They're not bad, but they just don't really do it for me. But overall, I still think this is a vast improvement. I actually listened to this album twice for this review because the first time I listened to it, I wasn't really connecting with it outside of some of the songs at the start of this album. But my second listen was a much more positive experience. I'm going to give this album a B. I think it's very solid, and I can see why a lot of people consider this their best album. Next up, we have the album Overcome, released in 2008. And this is an interesting album. They definitely increased the amount of melody on this one. There are a lot more melodic vocals. They do quite a few melodic vocals during verses of songs, which they hadn't done to this point. There's even a song that has extended acoustic parts. They've dabbled with acoustic sections before, but only in interludes. And honestly, I feel like this is as soft as the band should have gotten, because I feel like they still hold on to what makes them who they are, but still add some depth to their music. Now, I know where they're going to go from here, as I've heard the rest of their discography to some degree, but to me, this is really as soft as they should have gotten. And I think between this album and The Fall of Ideals, I feel like the band had a good blend of accessibility plus heaviness. And it's something that would have been nice if they had expanded on. Now, what's interesting about this album for me is the second half is a lot better than the first. Now, don't get me wrong, the album starts with a really kick-ass tune, Before the Damned, which is a pretty standard song, but it's a really good one. It's very heavy, it's got a catchy chorus. It's a really nice way to start the album. But the next few songs don't do as much for me. 2 Weeks is the first song they do where there's predominantly clean vocals, and it is a pretty decent song. It just doesn't grab me as much as some of their others. And then Undone is also a decent song, and it blends some harsh and clean vocals together pretty well. But again, it's just not hitting me like a lot of the band's standout tracks do. And then the next couple songs don't really do much for me at all. Forever in Your Hands is noteworthy because it's the first mostly melodic song the band has ever done. But again, it just doesn't really grab me that much. Again, not bad, but not really doing a whole lot for me. But after that, the album really kicks into high gear. We get Days Without, which is one of my favorite songs by the band. I really like this one. It's high energy, it's catchy, it's heavy. It's everything I want in an All That Remains song. And then we get A Song for the Hopeless, which I find this one to be interesting because it's got the softest moments on the album with an acoustic section, followed by some of the heavier moments on this album when the song picks up its pace a bit and gets heavier. And there's still a lot of harsh vocals in the chorus, which is an interesting choice. It's actually pretty good. It's a little different for a ballad, but it's not bad. And then we get the song Do Not Obey, which is another of my favorite songs by this band. Again, heavy, high energy, catchy. Again, just a really solid track. Up to this point in the band's career, Relinquish is my favorite song that doesn't have clean vocals. Hearing this song, I found myself bobbing my head to it, and I was really getting into it. This one's pretty good. And then you have the title track to basically end the album, and it's a pretty standard All That Remains song, but it's well done and I enjoy it. There is a cover song that ends the album. I didn't really bother listening to it because I don't really care. This album was a surprise for me. As I said, some of the songs at the start of the album didn't do as much for me as some of their better songs off of previous albums or even off of this one. But that second half really kicked it in high gear, and I really enjoy this one. I'm not sure if it's better or worse than The Fall of Ideals. All I can do is give it the same rating, a B. It's a very good album, and the band is on a roll. Although those of you who are familiar with the band know what comes next. Next, we have the album For We Are Many, released in 2010. Unlike most of their discography, I actually heard this album and its follow-up when these albums released. So I'm a little more familiar with this album and the next than I am the other albums in this discography. And with this album, the band shifts even more musically into a hard rock direction. There are songs on here that definitely would be classified more as hard rock than metal. There are still plenty of harsh vocals to be found on this album, although we are getting more and more clean vocals. But there's a disconnect because the guitar tone isn't nearly as heavy as the previous albums. So you can end up with harsh vocals going over hard rock sounding guitar riffs. And it just feels awkward because you don't have heavier guitar riffs going over those vocals. Now, don't get me wrong, I've complained about too many harsh vocals on early releases by this band, so I don't mind more clean vocals being added, especially if they're toning down the heaviness of the guitars. I just really wish they hadn't done that. I wish they had kept a heavier guitar presence. On a more positive note, there are several good guitar solos on this album, and I think Phil gives a pretty solid vocal performance. But unfortunately, there's just not a lot that's memorable for me, and there are way too many songs that feel like filler. I wouldn't say anything is bad on here, but there's just not a lot that does anything for me. The first 4 tracks I won't even listen to again. One is a mini track, and then you have 3 actual songs. I gave them 2 listens because I wanted to be fair for this review, and they did nothing for me. Again, they're not awful, but unlike some of the songs at the beginning of Overcome that maybe weren't as good as some of the standout tracks on that album, I could still acknowledge that they are good songs and that I do enjoy them. These first 4 tracks, I want nothing to do with ever again. And before I get to the positives, the final track also does nothing for me. And it's a shame because it's a full-on ballad, and I would really be open to an All That Remains well-done ballad. But unfortunately, this one just does not do it for me. It's another track I don't need to hear again. Fortunately, the rest of the album is significantly better. My favorite song on the album is a more hard rock song, Won't Go Quietly. It's catchy, it's got a good pace to it. I really enjoy this track. And it's followed by Aggressive Opposition, which is a heavier track. I really like this song actually, but it does kind of show off what I was talking about with this more hard rock guitar sound over these harsh vocals. It's still a good song, it just feels a little weird hearing the verses. I also really enjoy possibly the heaviest song on the album, Dead Wrong. There's not so much of a disconnect between the guitars and vocals during this track, and there's a ton of harsh vocals. But I really like the clean singing in the chorus. They do something a little different with it, and it's not something that I haven't heard before, but it's something I haven't heard this band do. So it's interesting hearing them try something a little different. And then Faithless is another track I really enjoy. It's a little more up-tempo, but going more into that hard rock style. It's got a chorus that's actually stuck in my head at the moment as I record this, but I also went back and listened to it again so that I could remember how it went for this review. And the rest of the songs kind of border on filler to me. I think Hold On is the best out of those songs, but there's nothing about these tracks that makes me want to come back to them. They're not bad, and I enjoyed them more than I did the first 4 tracks off this album, but they don't motivate me to come back to them. For me, this album was way too much filler and not enough substance. The guitar tones were toned down too much, and the songwriting just isn't up to par for me. It's not an awful album. I can see why people would like it, but except for Won't Go Quietly, Aggressive Opposition, Dead Wrong, and Faithless, I won't be coming back to this album. So I'm going to give this album a C. It's on the good side of okay, but even my favorite songs on here I don't remember. Next we have A War You Cannot Win, released in 2012. This is another album I've heard a little bit more than the rest of their discography. This also seems to be the album where a lot of fans moved away from the band. And I'm not sure why. Listening to this thing, it feels like For We Are Many 2.0. Yeah, it does feel a little more commercial, but not much. It's very similar to the previous album. The guitar tone is probably slightly softer, but not by much. We still get that disconnect that I was talking about on the previous album. I forgot to throw the drumming in there too, so it's basically you would have vocals and drumming sounding like they're doing a metalcore song, and then you'd have hard rock guitars playing over it. And that's still the case in a lot of the heavier tracks on this album. But putting that aside, as that's really my only complaint about this thing, I actually find the songwriting to be a lot better on this one. Just Moments in Time has an infectious chorus and is one of my favorite songs by this band. Stand Up is another one I really like. The title track is really good. I also really like A Call to All Non-Believers. I forgot to add Not Fading, which is a pretty enjoyable song. It's a more up-tempo melodic track, and Asking Too Much is pretty decent as well, even though that's a little more poppy. And honestly, there's not much negative I can say about this one. There are a couple of acoustic interlude tracks that I feel like serve no purpose. There are a couple of heavier tracks that don't really do much for me. The ballad, What If I Was Nothing, I think is a well put together radio ballad, but honestly, I'm not feeling it. And like I said, I'm not opposed to them doing a ballad. It's just, so far they're not working for me. Unless you count A Song for the Hopeless as a ballad. That one was actually pretty decent. But I don't understand the hate this album gets. I've heard some people consider this generic, but as much as I'm enjoying going through this discography, I consider this style of metal pretty generic. And that's not to insult the band by any means. As I said before, I'm enjoying going through this discography. It's just, I feel like it's a little odd. Yeah, What If I Was Nothing is a generic radio-friendly ballad, and I can understand people not liking that song. But other than that, I don't understand the hate for this album. I'm gonna give this album a B-. I'm feeling it. It's not as good as The Fall of Ideals, nor Overcome, but I think it's an improvement over the previous album. Next, we have The Order of Things, released in 2015. This is an album that gets a lot of criticism from fans, and I can kind of understand why. I don't think it's that bad of an album, but it suffers from some subpar songwriting. The main issue I'm having with this album is kind of like with For We Are Many. Most of these songs just aren't very memorable. I wouldn't say anything on this album is necessarily bad, it's just most of it's forgettable. Even the songs that stuck out to me when I listened to this album and thought, hey, this is a little better than the rest, I can't really remember. The album goes even further into the hard rock style that they've been moving towards. Most of the vocals on this album are clean, and they sound pretty good, to be honest. I like Phil's clean vocals. And I actually feel like the guitar tone on this album is a little better than the previous album. And some of the riffs work a lot better for me than the previous couple of albums. But that could be because there are fewer harsh vocals, which means there's not that identity crisis that I was feeling listening to the two previous albums. But I can't say that there's anything awful on this album, and there are certainly some decent tracks on here, even if they're not as memorable. The opening track, This Probably Won't End Well, is really good. The chorus isn't really that memorable, which does bring it down a little, but it's still a really solid track. That's actually my issue with this album is if they're gonna do hard rock, have some more catchy, punchy choruses to make the songs a little more memorable. But the verses in that track are pretty solid, and the chorus is good enough that I do really enjoy that track. The Greatest Generation is my second favorite song on the album. It's another up-tempo hard rock track with a reasonably catchy chorus. It's still one I have to think about in order to remember, but it's solid. I'd put that in an All That Remains playlist. The closing track, Criticism and Self-Reflection, is a pretty good way to end the album. It's got some harsh vocals mixed in with a softer melodic chorus. So rather than just having clean vocals during the chorus, the guitars are, I forget if they're acoustic or clean electric, but definitely not heavy. But this is a banger of a track. I really enjoy that one. But as I said before, my issue is these songs just aren't very memorable. There are other tracks that are fairly decent on here. Victory Lap was pretty decent, and I enjoyed A Reason for Me to Fight. But there are some more poppy elements thrown in a song like Divide, which has these poppy vocal effects that kind of turned me off a little bit. Again, not a bad track, but definitely not what I'm looking to listen to. I actually thought For a Radio Ballad, For You was a halfway decent track. It's not one I'll probably go back to, but I didn't mind listening to it. So I don't think this album is as bad as some might say, but I still have to give this album a C-. It's okay. I wouldn't be mad if I was hanging out somewhere and somebody played the album, but it's not one I'm really going back to very often, except for really 3 songs. Next, we have Madness, released in 2017, and oh boy. I've done my best to be extremely fair to this band throughout this video, but this album, there are actual songs on this thing, a majority of them actually, that are just bad. I can accept that a majority of the first 2 albums I didn't care for, but those albums were done in a style of metal that just isn't my thing. I can accept that. And I suppose one could make that argument here, but to me, these songs are just bad. The band skips doing more hard rock and goes straight into pop rock. There's a ton of electronic elements that I associate with pop. There are some vocal effects on a few tracks that, again, I associate with pop music. There are at least 3 ballads on here, 4 counting the cover song. We'll get to that. And I don't like the way Phil sings those songs. I don't know if there's a vocal effect on those tracks or if that's just how he sings, but he sounds like a typical pop singer on an acoustic track. To call this generic would be an understatement. It actually feels like the band was just following trends. Now, I don't know these band members. I don't know what they were going through. Maybe this is something they legit wanted to do. But either way, this did not work. The first 4 songs suck. The opening track might be the heaviest song on the album. It does harken back to those heavy songs with no clean vocals, but this one is just poorly constructed. In particular, the chorus. It feels very disjointed. It just feels like they're not really into making this style of song. The next 2 tracks illustrate what I was talking about with silly pop sounding electronic percussion noises and vocal effects, and they don't enhance these songs at all. Mind you, I enjoy some pop oriented rock, so I feel like I can judge whether or not something like this is done well, and these songs are not done well at all. Then you got If I'm Honest, which is a ballad, falling into all the tropes that I talked about before with the ballads on this album. This is the better of the 3 ballads. I feel like this one, if done a bit differently, could have worked, but instead they go with an acoustic pop song. River City, Far From Home, and Back to You are the other ballads. I've already said what I need to say about the ballads on this album. Louder is the other pop song in this album. This thing is extremely disjointed. It mixes some softer moments with some heavier moments during the verses, but they don't play off of each other well at all. And then the chorus is this silly call and response thing that doesn't work, and it has these annoying backing vocals that I can't stand. This is without a doubt the worst song they've ever done, at least their worst original song. So that's 5 ballads and 3 songs that have silly pop electronic music out of 13. That is not a good ratio. Now, the album's not all bad. The song Halo's okay. It's a bit up-tempo, more of a hard rock track, but it's a pretty decent song. Never Sorry does the pop rock thing decently, I would say. It's catchy, it's kind of fun, I kind of vibe with it. The 2 best songs on here, Trust and Believe and Open Grave, are really good songs. They're more of a typical song you would hear from this band, heavier verses with a melodic chorus, but they're done really well. That is one thing that this album has over the debut album, is it does have 2 songs I really like and would put amongst my favorite songs by this band. It's just everything else besides those 4 songs fucking blow. And then they did a really bad cover of a Garth Brooks song. And the thing is, I could see them actually knock this cover out of the park if they did it right, but instead they went with this pop ballad oriented thing, and it just did not work at all. Yeah, this album sucks. 2 really good songs and 2 kind of fun, okay songs aren't going to save it. I'm really torn on where to rank this because I feel like there are more strengths on this album than the debut, but We also have about 7 or 8 of their worst songs they ever made on here. I'm going to give this album a D-. This album is only getting that ranking because of the 4 songs I like. Otherwise, this would get an F. This is their worst album, even with a couple good songs on here. Everything else is so bad that it kind of negates the good. Next up, we have Victim of a New Disease, released in 2018. Although I am trying to stick to the albums, it is worth noting that their longtime lead guitarist died not long before this album came out, which is unfortunate. And I can see a bit of a course correct with this album. The guitars are heavier, the riffs are better, and they're definitely making more of a push to go back to being a metal band, which I appreciate. The album does still incorporate some pop elements. It has a couple ballads on it, but they are done a little better here. I still don't like the ballads, but I would say at the very least they're an improvement. My issue with this album is the songs just aren't hitting with me. The last 2 tracks are actually pretty good. I Meant What I Said and the title track. The title track being my favorite song on the album. And then the song Wasteland is also pretty good. But it feels like the band needed to take some more time to work on these songs before putting them on an album. It feels like they're almost there, but they're just not quite doing it for me. And obviously with the passing of the guitarist, had they taken longer, then this album would not have come out the way it did. So take that for what it is. I knew I was in trouble because I fell asleep while listening to this album and had to go back and listen to it again. It's not terrible by any means. I like the guitar tone. I like the push to more of a heavy direction. And I think they do blend everything they've done from Overcome through the previous album. But I do feel like several of these songs have potential, and with a little more work, they really could have been something. Again, it's not a bad album. Musically, it goes into a much better direction than what we've heard on the last 4 albums, but it doesn't have very many songs that I want to come back to. And this is another one of those albums I really don't remember anything on. So I'm going to give this album a C. It's okay. Some people like it, and it definitely is steering the ship back into the right direction. And finally, at least for now, we've got Anti-Fragile, released in 2025. And what an album this is, and what a surprise. This is actually the album that motivated me to give this band another shot. The production is solid. Everybody sounds really good on here. Everybody gives good performances. Phil's vocals are great. The guitars are awesome. The drumming is fantastic. This is one of my favorite albums for good drumming. I will admit some of these songs took some time to grow on me, but once they did, most of them hit pretty well for me. There are a couple filler tracks on here. No Tomorrow, Poison It, and Cut the Tongues Out don't really do a whole lot for me, but they're not bad either. And the rest of the album is hit after hit after hit. The album opens with my favorite song of 2025, Divine. This is a fantastic song. It's got a lot of energy. I love how brutal the song starts out. It's got a nice catchy chorus. It does feel a little disjointed in that the guitars get so melodic during the chorus. I wish there had still been a heavy riff, kind of maintaining that heaviness, even with the vocals going melodic. I think they could still have the melodic guitars in there, just keep a heavy riff going. But that's a minor nitpick. It's a great song. And it's also my favorite song by this band. The album also has my second favorite song of 2025, the title track, which is also my second favorite song by this band. This one is pretty heavy straight through. They do mix some clean vocals in the chorus a little bit, and I really like how they do that. I've said several times on this video, I like when bands can mix the harsh and clean vocals and have them play off of each other. And Phil does a really good job on this track. The guitars are great. Again, the drums are great. Everything just works out really well for this song. Kerosene is easily in my top 10 favorite songs of 2025, possibly top 5. It's another fantastic track, more on the heavy side. I like how heavy this album is. And it doesn't feel like they're retreading old ground. It feels like a natural evolution of their heavier style. I even like the song Let You Go, which is musically still reasonably heavy, but mostly the vocals are clean. It's kind of going for more of a, I guess, radio metal type thing. But it's still a really nice track, and still probably would be within my top 15 to 20 songs of 2025. This one's a really good one. The closing track, Blood and Stone, is actually a pretty cool way to end the album. And The Piper and Forever Cold have just been growing on me in the last couple months. These are actually really good songs that I'm liking more and more as I listen to them. This is a fantastic album and a great way to end this discography review. I'm going to give this album a very enthusiastic B+. It's still not up to classic status for me, something that I would give A tier, but it is really good and an album that I've consistently come back to this year. So that's it. That's my All That Remains discography review. Done. If I'm still making music reviews when they come out with another album, I will obviously talk about it. But for now, I have to find an awkward way to end the review. Originally, I did this whole breakdown of worst to best albums, but I really don't feel like editing that, and I recorded this back in October. It's March 1st as I record this, and I hope to post this today. I posted a poll on my channel several months ago asking which band people wanted to hear me talk about next. The choices were Skid Row, which is the band I really want to do a discography review of, and Avenged Sevenfold, which I've actually reviewed quite a few of their albums already. However, since I posted that poll, Megadeth announced that their album that came out this year would be their last, so that will be my next discography review. As for All That Remains, I'm really glad I went through their discography. I found a new appreciation for this band, and I will be excited to hear what they put out next. And before I get out of here, I just want to thank you for watching. Be sure to do all the YouTube algorithm things to help out my channel. Also check out my gaming videos if you're interested in retro games. And I will see y'all in the Megadeth discography review. No idea when I will post that.